So today we're going to start on the actual commandments from the Ten Commandments. Last week we started kind of with what's called the prologue. It kind of sets the stage for what's taking place there, sets the setting for it, and gives us what God was intending with those commandments. Now, once we do that, though, we're not going to spend 1 week on every commandment from this point out. That is what we normally expect preachers to do, because preachers look at that and we go, ooh, 10 commandments, that's at least 10 weeks. You throw an intro and an exit on the other end of that makes 12, and you are good. You throw a couple of extras in between so that you kind of space them out and we don't overload folks. There's an entire summer series without a lot of work. We're not going to do that because I think partially because that would get really boring for me, I think, but most importantly because that doesn't actually do justice to the commandments. And especially for us as we try to seek to apply them and live them out, we're going to take some of them, we're going to put them together because they go together. There's so much overlap between some of these commandments that we need to take them together, which is what we're doing this morning. We're taking the first two commandments and combining, pulling them together this morning as they are kind of taking on a lot of the same sorts of themes. And so we have to remember when we do this that the commandments are meant to be lived out. They aren't rules in the way that we normally think of rules, but they are ways of living. And to get there, though, it requires a different way of thinking. Because the world we live in today is much different than the world of Moses' time when he received them from God and then he gave them to the people. And so we need to approach them differently so that they make sense for us. And the hope of the commandments is that they're not actually restrictive, that they are actually freeing, that they give us more freedom with those commandments than without. But this isn't how living with rules works. Donna pointed that out this morning already. We go back to the Garden of Eden. We can go back to the very first people and we show how good we are at following rules. We're not. They only had one rule back then and they couldn't follow it, much less when we get up to today's times. And the irony of all of this is that when we take a look at the commandments, they are actually less restrictive for us than everything else. But we like to look and we like to say, well, but the grass is greener over there. Life is easier if we just go over there, we follow those rules over there, right? Now the trouble with that is, these rules over here, they don't go away, the commandments don't go away, so we say, well, it's easier over here, but we know that we're still being affected by these ones over here, so we say, well, I've got to do things to make sure, I've got to keep track of what I'm doing wrong. I got to keep track of the things I'm not doing that I should be, and the things I'm doing that I'm not supposed to be doing, and then I've got to figure out how do I mitigate all of those things so that I can keep track of all this, so that when I know I'm doing wrong over here, I'm somehow trying to make it right over here, and it gets complicated really fast. Because we got to keep track of all that stuff, keep track of all those things that are going on. Think about it like this. This is a really goofy example, but I'm pretty sure y'all don't expect anything else from me at this point. But I go back to when I was in, I think, junior high or high school, about a teenager. We were on a camp out with Boy Scouts. And it was one of those like late February, early March campouts that we were on. And we were getting up on Sunday morning and we were getting ready to make breakfast. Now this is on one of those campouts, and what's really good for breakfast that morning is biscuits and gravy. I blame the Boy Scouts for my undying love of all things biscuit and gravy, because that's where I really got into those. And we got started and we were making breakfast, and we were using packet gravy. So we had put the milk in, we'd put the packet of stuff in, and we were trying to get it to thicken up. It wasn't thickening. So being the wonderful teenagers that we were, we immediately assumed that we hadn't done something right, that maybe we put too much milk in, that maybe our fire wasn't hot enough to really get it going, so it was going to thicken up. We didn't bother ever to think that it had only been on there for 30 seconds and it wasn't going to thicken up in that short a period of time. We were ready for it to be done, and so we began to put a plan together to fix the problem. We weren't self-aware enough to be more patient, but we came up with something different. We said, oh, our leaders last night, they had mashed potatoes with dinner, and they used instant potato flakes. You know what works really well to thicken up gravy? instant potato flakes. So we went and we got, they didn't need any more of them because we were going home later in the day. So we go, we grab them, we borrowed them from them with their permission, and we bring them over. And I think they were probably laughing at us because they knew what was going to happen. But we go and put some in, it didn't really work. So we said, well, you know, maybe we could put some more in. And that began to work. That was really good. We got it going, and it began to thicken up really good. And being the teenagers that we were, said, well, if a little bit worked, let's put some more in and really get this thickened up quick. So we put some more in, and by golly, we had good gravy to put on biscuits. But you know what happened after that? It started to thicken up on its own. The problem never was that we didn't do it right, that the fire wasn't hot enough, anything. We just got impatient. We said, what could it hurt to add some more things to this? And then we got our gravy, and then it started to get even thicker. And at one point, we all took a turn at this because it had gotten so thick, we could take the pot off of the fire with the wooden spoon inside of it, put it up over our heads, and not get hit with anything. And then we put it back down. To this day, it is still the thickest gravy that I have ever made in my entire life. And I have helped manually mix concrete. We ate as much of it as we could, but it didn't go down quite as well as we were hoping. The point of that is we tried to mitigate our own impatience with another solution. We thought, well, what would it hurt just to add a little bit more? What would it hurt just to make it go just a little bit better? We didn't think that we were ever going to be making sausage gravy concrete. That wasn't our intent. But therein lies, in this goofy story, lies the point of the first commandment. When God tells us to have no other gods before him, he's trying to make our life simpler and easier. He's saying, let go of all this other stuff over here that's really hard to keep track of, that means you've really got to find other ways of mitigating all the things that are happening and going on, that we do because we get impatient. Let go of all these other things and focus just here in this one place. Focus on me. Let go of this other stuff. Let me make your life simpler so you don't have to do all of these other things. And you can find a better way. And then God also tells us, he says, and have no false idols. Don't make for yourself a false idol. All because he's trying to get us to have just a little bit more patience. Telling us that eventually the gravy is going to thicken. You don't need to help it out any on your own. Have some faith. But we struggle with that because we get impatient. We feel like we need to be doing something. I mean, I know I'm really guilty of this. I always feel like I've got to be doing something. And so we say, what could it hurt to add just a little bit more over here? What could it hurt just to do something over here just to kind of help this out? What's the worst thing that could happen? Now, like I said earlier, this isn't anything that is new for us. We've been doing this kind of thing for a very long time. In fact, this is the same thing that the Israelites were doing in the story that Donna read for us with the golden calf. And every time we come to that story, I never see the story as we read it in Scripture. I always see the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. That's what comes to mind when we start talking about the golden calf. That's the first story we're going to look at this morning. We're going to look at a second story also coming from 1 Samuel chapter 7. Both of them are kind of following in the same thing, but they approach it very differently. We look at the story of the golden calf. And remember where we're coming from. Moses, at God's command, has gone to Egypt, has brought the people out of slavery in Egypt, and then they crossed the Red Sea when they had gotten backed up against that, and things were good. God has shown his power. It was great. And they come, now they're at the foot of Mount Sinai. And Moses has gone up the mountain as God commanded. This is where he's going to receive the Ten Commandments written by God's own hand. The rest of the people were told, don't go to the mountain or you're going to die. Sometimes God seems over the top in the Old Testament, but that's the Old Testament. That is what God is doing there. We're going to see why that's important a little bit later on. But the rest of the folks were going, check, that makes sense. Don't go up the mountain. Okay, we got it. Sometimes they had to be told in fairly blunt terms what to do and what not to do. And so I said, no, okay, don't go up the mountain. Things are okay for a bit. The trouble starts when a few folks come up to Moses' brother Aaron and they say, Aaron, we run into a problem. Moses has been gone for a while. we're getting a little worried. We don't know if he's died up there. We don't know if he has fallen and broken something. We don't know if he just ate too many biscuits and gravy and now it's sitting on his stomach and he's gotten sick. We don't know what's going on up there on the mountain, and we are worried. He said, tell us what to do. Make us an idol so we can do something. We know we're not supposed to go up there, so make us an idol so we can worship something down here. And Aaron looks back at him and says to him, okay, what could it hurt? Go ahead and go get all your earrings, get your jewelry, bring it back to me. I'm going to melt it down, and we're going to make an idol, and then we're going to throw a big party for that idol, and we're going to worship it, and things are going to be okay. Obviously, things don't go well. While Moses is up there, God tells him, look at what your people are doing. Look at the things they're doing. You haven't even gotten back down the mountain yet, and they're already messing things up. And in verse 10, where we ended it, God says to Moses, let my fury burn and devour them. Remember, God gets over the top sometimes with the things that he says, but he does it for an important reason. He's wanting us to know and the people to know just how much he cares, how much he loves them. He doesn't do it. He doesn't devour them. He doesn't let his fury burn. But they do wander in the wilderness for 40 years after that so that they can figure it out, so they can get it right after this. The other story we have comes from 1 Samuel chapter 7. And it goes kind of in a different direction and I love this story, because the Israelites here do something that we are not used to seeing them do in all of the Old Testament because it is so very rare. They realize before someone tells them that they've done messed up. We come into the story, and it has been 20 years of relative peace and stability in Israel. That in and of itself was kind of unusual, but for them, peace meant something a little bit different because it was a much more warlike time. But they didn't have too many worries from the Philistines. They'd kind of hit this kind of latent Cold War thing going on with the Philistines. Things were okay. They were at peace. Things were relatively stable. And but as time went on, some things had kind of crept into their lives. Things from other peoples that were around them that they practiced, that they did, it kind of crept into their own traditions. And I can even see how this plays itself out, that even maybe the first time they didn't really know what they were doing when they worshipped one of these false gods or one of these false idols. But the second time they did, and I can see how their thinking would go. I mean, they'd say, well, we've got one God. We accidentally did this thing the other time. It seemed to work out pretty well, so now maybe we've got two gods? I mean, what could it hurt to go ahead and worship that second God? Maybe even add a third God, because 3 is better than 2, and 2 is still bigger than 1. So, hey, you know what? Life is good. Let's keep doing this. But somewhere along the way, like I said, this really unusual thing happens. The Israelites, they come back to Samuel and they say, Samuel, something's not sitting right. We feel off. We feel like something is wrong, like something has, like we just don't know what to do. We don't know if we've done something wrong. We don't know if we got bad milk in the gravy. We don't know what it is that's going on, but something is off with us. Tell us what to do. And that's when Samuel, who at this point was judge over Israel, says, all right, here's what you need to do. First things first, you need to get rid of all these foreign gods that you've got. You think that you aren't doing any harm by having all this stuff, but you're making your lives harder, and most importantly, you're breaking the first commandment. So let go of all these other foreign gods, all your Astartes, your Baals. That's always a hard word to say because it's spelled B-A-A-L-S. We don't have 2 A's in many words in English. Get rid of all of these things and go and ask God for forgiveness. Confess your sin. Remember last week we talked about how what defines a community of faith is first some sort of initiation, or for us, baptism, that says you are officially kind of a full part of this community of faith. But then there's 3 things. There is confession, there's forgiveness, and there's reconciliation. And we're going to see all of these things play itself out in this story, where the people come up to Samuel. Samuel tells them what to do. They go to God and ask for forgiveness. They confess their sins. They get rid of all these foreign gods. God says, good, you're forgiven. You have done the right things. And then we know that reconciliation has happened because we get to the end of this story. And this is about the time the Philistines have decided that they're going to end this latent Cold War thing they've got going on, and they're going to come and directly attack the Israelites. And this is the point where God says, I don't think so, y'all. And literally like scares them out of their pants. Like they just get scared like crazy at the end of this story. And in the midst of their panicking in the middle of all of this, the Israelite army comes in and just totally defeats the Philistines. And through the rest then of Samuel's time as judge in Israel, there is peace and it's stable and things are okay. Samuel, in talking to the people, says to him this in verse 3. Samuel says to the whole house of Israel, if you are turning to the Lord with all your heart, then get rid of all the foreign gods and the Astartes you have. Set your heart on the Lord. Worship him only. Worship him only. How do you show God that you love him? And then you've turned to him with all your heart. You worship him and only him. You let go of all the other things that are out there. And the first commandment is based in worship. Worship is based in loving God with our whole being. It's about trusting God through that worship so that we can be patient and that we can wait, that we don't need to do other things to try and make up for what we're waiting on God to do. We don't need to find these other idols to pick up the slack in there. Because idols aren't about shrines to other gods. Or in the modern way we do this, again, if I've seen lots of other pastors do this, we say, well, we don't have too many idols nowadays, but you know what the biggest idol we have is money. That's the direction they always go to next, and they say, oh, the idol is money. The thing about idols is that they aren't things. They're about the things we do because we don't trust our worship. Idols aren't based on things, but the things are the representations of the idols that we already have, of the things we're already doing, of the times we've already said, well, what could it hurt to go and do this? So let's put all this together. When we put our faith in God, that's where we put our worship. And worship requires time and trust and patience. And it's not just about being in church on Sunday morning, although that is really important because, again, that's where we come together as the community of faith. And we remember that the commandments don't make a whole lot of sense outside of that community that comes together and that is focused on confession and forgiveness and reconciliation, that finds its way of making through all of the crazy things that happen. Being in church is a part of our worship, but worshiping God is a lifestyle choice that defines who we are. It means we think about questions like, what would it hurt to do whatever? What could it possibly hurt to add an extra 2 cups of potato flakes to this gravy that's already started to thicken up? Not going to hurt a whole lot except my gut when we have to pack everything up later in the morning and try and move around. It means that we remember when God says that he is a jealous God, which is what happens in the commandment to have no false idols. God says, for I am a jealous God. Other translations of scripture say, I am a passionate God. Reminded that God is saying that because he is our God. He is committed to us. This isn't the green-eyed monster of jealousy, but it's one that says, where God is saying, I want what is best for you. And I am working hard to make your life simpler so that you can live it out to your fullest potential. I don't want you to get lost. This is a God that loves us so much that he's made it possible for us to live a life that is free. In their book called The Truth About God, where Stanley Hauerwas and Will Willimon go through the 10 Commandments, they have a couple of statements they make that really kind of bring this out. They say the commandments are not guidelines for humanity in general. They are a countercultural way of life for those who know who they are, and most importantly, whose they are. The mistake that often gets made with the commandments is that we try to apply them to other people. We might even say that they're the rules of the road that everyone should follow. And I've driven down I-70 and Highway 36 enough to know that we are really bad at following the rules. We just don't get there very well. For us, they become the ways that we live. For others that are outside of our communities of faith, they don't make a lot of sense. They don't have the impact on them that they need. But most importantly, they say this God jealously wants to be known as the one who yoked himself with a people. This is what we forget was so radical with what God was doing back then and what God is still doing today. That he said to them, "You are my people, made covenant with him." He yoked himself with them and with us. This wasn't normal back then. It's still not normal now that God would do this. God has chosen to be a part of this covenant more so even than we have. So our response is that we can be a people who live a life of worship that is freer than those that are around us, and yet is still full and complete, even with these commandments that we seek to follow. And so let us be people of the commandments, be in worship of a God and a community of faith together, and remember that God still continues to make that work, because later on he would give us another gift still to help us see more clearly that he is our God and wants us to be all that we can be, who he made us to be when he sent his son to come into this world. And so when we say that we do all of this in Christ's name, we are doing it in the name of the one that God sent to both reinforce what he has already said and to show us the path that we so desperately need. Let us go and let us be these people of faith that seek out God, that have him as our only God, and know that he has made for us a life that can be full and complete, and that we can join in worship of him together. Let us be those people.